Today we are back again looking at part 2 of the UK's longest serving criminals who are still alive and still serving their time. 1. John Childs. John Childs was convicted of the murder of 6 people in contract killings which were committed between 1974 and 1978. The victims' bodies were never found as he put the bodies in his fireplace. 2 of his victims were father and son. He went against gang code and killed George Brett and his 10-year-old son, Terry Brett. John implicated 2 others, Harry McKenney and Terry Pinfold, and they were convicted in 1980 of 25 years before parole. But they were both released on appeal in 2003 after John Childs' evidence was called into question. Serial killer John Childs murdered Terence Eve in 1974. Robert Brown in 1975, George Brett and his 10-year-old son Terry Brett in 1975, Fred Sherwood in 1978 and Ronald Andrews later on in 1978. John was jailed in December 1979 and given a whole life sentence. He told a journalist in 1998 that he had committed 5 more murders. John went on to appeal against his convictions in 2014 and in 2016 but was rejected both times. 84-year-old serial killer John Childs will die behind bars. 2. Anthony Arkwright. Anthony Arkwright is a convicted British spree killer who over the course of 56 hours in August 1988 murdered 3 people in South Yorkshire. He idolised Jack the Ripper and the Yorkshire Ripper Peter Sutcliffe, telling people he would commit a crime like they had. He was known to the police as a petty criminal, but in August 1988 he was fired from his job, and that is when the killing spree began. He stabbed to death his 68-year-old grandfather and his grandfather's neighbours, Raymond Ford, 46, and Marcus Law, 26. He is also suspected of murdering his grandfather's elderly housekeeper. Anthony was 21 years old at the time of the spree killings and was 22 when he was convicted. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he serve at least 25 years. In 1990, the then Home Secretary, Jack Straw, declared this term as too lenient and increased the term to that of a whole life tariff. 56-year-old Anthony is still behind bars and that is where he will stay. 3. Mark Robinson. 17-year-old Mark Robinson killed Patricia Wagner when she threatened to tell his mother about the affair the two were having. He was convicted of the murder of Patricia Wagner and he served just 10 years. He was released in 1989 and met Sharon Morley. The two moved to Billingham shortly after. However, Sharon wanted to move back to Wakefield, which caused a lot of arguments. On the 19th of September 1989, he discovered a photo of her former boyfriend, and they had another argument. However, this argument ended with him murdering Sharon. Mark was sentenced to life imprisonment at his trial and was later issued with a whole life tariff. 61-year-old Mark still serves his time behind bars today. 4. Malcolm Green. Malcolm Green was jailed for life in 1971 for the brutal murder in Cardiff of Glenys Johnson. He rang the Welsh police saying, "Have you found the body yet? There will be 4 more. This is the Ripper." The police traced the phone call back to his workplace and found his bloodied clothes. He spent 18 years in prison before being released on parole in 1989, as a psychiatrist said he was safe to be released. Soon afterwards, in 1990, he killed Clive Tully, a young tourist from New Zealand who was his friend. Malcolm Green dumped Clive's body in bags at different places along a road in South Wales. Green left forensic evidence on the bags, in his flat and on his clothing. He was sentenced to life again in October 1991 with a recommendation that he should serve a min of 25 years. This was changed shortly by the Home Secretary and he was given a whole life tariff. In court, when he was brought down, he shouted at the jury, "You are wrong." He still serves his time today. 5. Peter Moore. 77-year-old Peter Moore murdered 4 men in Wales. He also committed 39 assaults on men in Wales and the Merseyside area. He confessed to police but claimed at trial it was in fact a fictional lover, Jason, named after the killer from Friday the 13th. He is the person who had killed them. He was found guilty on all counts. During his time in prison, he made friends with fellow serial killer Harold Shipman. In March 2008, Peter Moore was told he had been given a whole life tariff and would never be released from prison. In 2011, he appealed his whole life tariff, along with 2 other inmates, but his appeal was rejected. His last appeal he made was rejected in 2017. Peter Moore will remain in prison for the rest of his life. 6. Mark Martin. 43-year-old Mark Martin killed 3 homeless women in Nottingham between December 2004 and January 2005. In October 2004, Martin was arrested on suspicion of assaulting his wife. The next day, he rang the police and told them he had bad thoughts and that he would end up killing someone. No action was taken. By December 2004, he was living in a tent in Nottingham near an abandoned warehouse where the homeless community would frequent. This is where he met John Ashley and Dean Carr. They were feared by the homeless community. Mark Martin was known as a violent bully. Martin declared his ambition to become Nottingham's first serial killer to his 2 friends. In the same year of 2004, the bodies of 26-year-old Zoe Pennick and 18-year-old Katie Baxter were found 6 days apart in the warehouse. And then in 2005, the body of 25-year-old Ellen Frith was found. John Ashley and Dean Carr were convicted alongside Mark Martin. They received 14 and 25-year min terms. Mark Martin, who was the ringleader, was convicted of all 3 murders and given life imprisonment with a whole life order. And that is where he still remains today. 7. Mark Hobson. 54-year-old Mark Hobson murdered his girlfriend Claire Sanderson at their home near Selby in July 2004. He then lured her twin sister Diane there and murdered her several days later. He then fled from the property and murdered elderly couple James and Joan Britton, who lived several miles away. There is no link between Mark Hobson and the Brittons, so why they were killed remains a question. He then went on the run, with the UK police looking for him. He was arrested very shortly after when he was spotted hiding in bushes near a petrol station in North Yorkshire. Hobson pled guilty to all charges in April 2005 and was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge imposing a whole life order. Later that year in 2005, Hobson applied for a lower tariff, saying that he merited some credit for admitting to the crimes at an early stage in order to avoid a lengthy trial, but this was rejected by the Lord Chief Justice, and he still remains serving his time with a whole life order. 8. David Tiley. 2 months after he was released from prison, he murdered his disabled fiancée Susan Hale, who suffered from a brain disorder, and a week later he murdered her carer Sarah Merritt at Miss Hale's flat in Southampton in March 2007. Susan was last seen alive on the 5th of March, and both their bodies were found on the 15th of March. Tiley admitted to both murders at his trial on the 14th of June 2007 and was sentenced to life imprisonment, the trial judge recommending that he should never be released from prison. After his trial, it was revealed that Tiley had received a 6-year jail term for R in 1995, and after his release had returned to prison 3 separate times for failing to inform police of his whereabouts, which is a compulsory procedure. 63-year-old David Tiley remains in prison. 9. John Sweeney. 65-year-old John Sweeney was given a whole life tower for murdering 2 former girlfriends. In 1994, Sweeney went on the run after trying to kill an ex-girlfriend. By 2000, John Sweeney, still on the run, returned to London. He started a relationship in 2001 with Paula Fields. Paula was reported missing that same year. John Sweeney was then finally arrested for his attack on his ex-girlfriend, and by February 2001, Paula Fields' body was discovered in Regent's Canal in London. By 2008, Melissa Halstead's remains were identified, her being a former girlfriend of John Sweeney's too. And in April 2011, John Sweeney received a life tariff for the murders of his ex-girlfriends Paula Fields and Melissa Halstead. There is presumed to be more victims, the police stating, "As he contemplates a life behind bars, I can assure him that his investigation will continue as we seek to identify and trace other potential victims in the UK, Netherlands and elsewhere in Europe who may have suffered a similar fate to that of Melissa and Paula." 65-year-old John Sweeney remains behind bars today. 10. Lucy Letby. 33-year-old nurse Lucy Letby was given a whole life tariff for murdering 7 newborn babies and the attempted murder of 6 others. The trial lasted a year. She injected insulin and air while being their nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital. She is the most prolific serial killer of children in modern British history, and it is suspected there are more victims which are being investigated at other hospitals she worked at, as well as a private government inquiry into the circumstances surrounding the murders. She will never be released. 11. Anthony Russell. 41-year-old Anthony Russell was sentenced to a whole life order for the murders of Nicole McGregor, David Williams and Julie Williams. He began a crime spree for a week in October 2020. Russell murdered mother and son Julie and David Williams, 58 and age 32, at their flats. He first took the life of David and 4 days later did the same to David's mother, Julie, presumably because she suspected, or he had told her, he had murdered her son. She reported David missing and 2 days later she was reported missing herself. The police found Julie and then they raided Anthony Russell's home, and this is when they found David also. Then one of the biggest manhunts in UK history began. While on the run, he took the life of Nicole McGregor, aged 31, who was pregnant. She had shown him a baby scan. After this, Anthony Russell spoke with Nicole's boyfriend and said, "I bet you can't wait for the baby to come." He also helped with the search of Nicole. There is no link between Nicole McGregor and Anthony Russell. He fled Leamington and robbed an elderly man of his car. He was caught and arrested as the police spotted him in the stolen car, and he was present in the back seat. Anthony Russell went to trial and was convicted of all 3 murders. The judge said he will never have parole and will never be released from prison, handing him a whole life order. 12. Victor Miller. 67-year-old Victor Miller is serving a whole life tariff for the murder of 14-year-old Stuart Goff. In 1980, Miller served 7 years for kidnapping a 13-year-old boy. By 1988, he tried to kidnap Richard Holden, who was 18 years old, whilst he was riding his bike in Wellington, but Richard managed to fight him off and he escaped. On the same day in Hagley, the couple who ran the newsagents contacted the police, reporting a second attempt of a kidnapping of a paperboy who worked for them. The next day, on the 18th of January, paperboy Stuart Goff went to work to do his paper round. He was doing 2 rounds that day, but filled up his bag for the first and would come back for the papers for his second round. He did not return for his second paper round, and the police were called, sparking a huge police manhunt. Miller kidnapped Stuart Goff and then took his life. He put his body near the M50. The police linked all 3 incidences to Victor Miller based on witness statements of his car. Looking further into him, it was discovered he was on the register, and so was the man he was living with, Trevor Peacher. Peacher gave Miller an alibi at first, and they were arrested for the murder of Stuart Goff, but the police found Peacher was not involved, and Miller soon confessed to the kidnapping and murder. He led the police to Stuart's body and pleaded guilty to murder and kidnapping. He was given a whole life tariff. At court, Victor Miller said, "I would ask that justice will be done and I will receive the maximum sentence available." He has since asked to die behind bars, and that is exactly what he will do. 13. Paul Glenn. 51-year-old Paul Glenn was given a whole life tariff for the murder of Robert Bogle. Previously, in 1989, he murdered OHara in a botched robbery. He was sentenced to life imprisonment but only served 13 years and was released in 2002. In 2004, Paul Glenn was paid £300 to be a hitman and kill Vincent Smart. He was hired by Robert Lotz, who believed Mr. Vincent Smart had been threatening his son. Robert Lotz's brother-in-law, Wayne Wright, had connections, and that's how they hired Paul Glenn. Both Robert Lotz and Wayne Wright have said he was only hired to intimidate Vincent Smart and nothing more. Glenn travelled from Liverpool to Vincent Smart's house. Glenn knocked down the door and started attacking who he thought was Mr. Smart, but it wasn't, and he murdered Robert Bogle. Vincent Smart was out for the night, and it was Robert, who lived with him, that Glenn murdered. After the attack, Robert was able to crawl down the street where he shouted to call for an ambulance. A group of girls were walking by and saw Glenn walk calmly out of the house. Glenn went on the run and travelled to Blackpool, but on Monday the 4th of August he was arrested for Robert's murder. He was convicted and given a whole life tariff. In September 2005 he appealed his whole life tariff and it was rejected. He will stay in prison for the rest of his life. 14. Michael Smith. 73-year-old Michael Smith was given a whole life tariff for the murder of Peter Summers. At 25 years old, Smith murdered his girlfriend Sheila Deacon and was sentenced to life imprisonment. In August 2006 he was released after serving 25 years, and a year later he went to his friend's house, Peter Summers. He knew Peter's partner had £8,000 stashed in his loft, and Michael Smith murdered Peter and took the money. 4 days later, Peter Summers' mum raised concerns about her son, and this was when he was discovered. 2 days after the murder, Michael Smith's girlfriend said he took her on a shopping spree, but acted strange and told her he was in big trouble. By the end of August, Smith handed himself in to the police, and a year later he was sentenced and convicted of the murder of Peter Summers. He was handed a whole life tariff. 15. Douglas Vinter. 53-year-old Douglas Vinter was convicted and given a whole life order for the murder of his wife, Anne White. In 1996 he murdered Carl Eden. He served 9 years in prison for the murder and then was released. After being released from prison, he married Anne White, but they separated soon after as he attacked her on 2 occasions. While on licence, he got into a fight at a pub and he was sent back to prison for 6 months. After being released, he then went on to murder his wife, Anne White. 2 weeks before her murder, she had told her best friend how she wanted to leave him but was too scared. On the 21st of April 2008, Douglas Vinter admitted to killing his wife and was charged with the murder and given a whole life order. In prison in July 2011, Vinter attacked the killer of Sarah Payne, Roy Whiting. Whiting did not press charges. In November 2014, he also attacked another murderer as he wanted to be moved to a prison with a better gym. He was handed another life sentence for the attempted murder. He still serves his whole life order today. 16. Mark Chivers. 56-year-old Mark Chivers was given a whole life tariff for the murder of Maria Stubbings. Mark Chivers was the son of a British Army officer who was serving in Germany. He was born and grew up in Germany. In 1992, he murdered his girlfriend and was given a life sentence. He served 15 years in a German prison and then was deported to the UK. Once back in the UK, he quickly met his girlfriend Maria Stubbings, but in July 2008, he was given a 4-month prison time for battery against Maria. In the December of that same year, Maria let the police know that he had broken into her house, but she did not wish to press charges. On the 19th of December, the police called to Maria's house. He answered the door and said Maria was not in. Then on the 19th, they visited again, but this time they entered the house, and that is when they found the body of Maria. In 2009, he was charged with Maria's murder, which he denied, but at trial he then changed his plea to guilty. In December 2009, he was charged with Maria's murder and handed a whole life order, with no parole and never to see the outside of prison again. 17. Desmond Lee. Desmond Lee was handed a whole life tariff and convicted of the murder of his lover, Christopher Pratt. In 1989, Lee killed his landlady after she made fun of his breakup with his first boyfriend. He pled not guilty but was convicted and served 14 years. In 2004, Lee was released and had to remain on licence. 5 years later, Desmond Lee murdered his lover, Christopher Pratt. He then took Christopher's debit cards and paid off bills. He bought food and alcohol and then attempted to buy thousands of pounds of goods in other stores. The day after, he moved Christopher's body to moorland and it was discovered by a jogger 11 days later. 1 year later, Desmond Lee was in court and admitted to the death of Christopher Pratt, but said it was an accident. Desmond Lee was found guilty of murder. The judge called him a dangerous and evil man, and he was handed a whole life tariff. 18. Dale Cregan. 40-year-old Dale Cregan was handed a whole life order for 4 murders committed in 2012. Cregan was a dealer. He said he lost his eye in Thailand during a fight, but police believe he lost his eye as it was intentionally removed by rival gangsters. On May 25, 2012, Dale Cregan shot and killed Mark Short while in a pub. He also attempted to kill 3 other men. On August 10, 2012, he killed David Short, Mark's father. On the 18th of September 2012, Cregan phoned the police. It was a hoax. Manchester police officers Nicola Hughes, 23, and Fiona Bone, 32, arrived at Cregan's address. He took the life of both officers. He then handed himself in, admitting the murders of police officers Fiona Bone and Nicola Hughes. He then went to trial. His trial cost around £5 million as security was so high. Cregan was convicted of all 4 murders and 3 counts of attempted murder and was given a whole life tariff. 2 months into serving his sentence in August 2013, he went on hunger strike, so he was moved, where he continues to serve his lifelong sentence. 19. Paul OHara. 52-year-old Paul OHara was given a whole life order for the murder of his ex-girlfriend Shirley Shannon in 2014. In 1998, he was jailed for life for murdering his ex-girlfriend Janine Waterworth as she ended their relationship. He served 13.5 years. Just 2 years after being released on the 17th of March 2014, his girlfriend Shirley Shannon contacted his probation officers, telling them that he had beaten her up. Later on that same day, police turned up to Shirley's house. She was given them a statement, and that is when Paul OHara arrived and barged past the officers and attacked her. He took her life and attacked both officers. He was taken into the station and charged with the murder. He told police, "There's no point interviewing me, I'm not going to say anything," before admitting his motive for the murder was because he thought the police were about to recall him to prison. On the 30th of June 2014, he was charged with Shirley Shannon's murder and 10 years and 12 months for assaulting the police officers. The judge gave him a whole life order and branded him as a dangerous man who should never be released. He is still serving his time today. 20. Christopher Halliwell. 59-year-old Christopher Halliwell was given a whole life order for the murder of Becky Gooden and Sean O'Callaghan. In March 2007, Christopher Halliwell became a client of 20-year-old Becky Gooden, but he became obsessive of her and he took her life and buried her body in a remote location. She was not discovered for 8 years. In March 2011, taxi driver Halliwell went to pick up Sean O'Callaghan from a nightclub. He then took her life. On the 31st of May, he was charged with Sean O'Callaghan's murder. He said he was not guilty, but at his trial in October 2012, he changed his plea to guilty and was sentenced to 25 years min tariff. In June 2014, the police found boots belonging to Sean and lots of other clothing belonging to other women. Soil found where Becky was buried was linked to a spade owned by Christopher Halliwell. The police also had an account from a recovery man who picked a taxi up just a few miles away from where Becky was found. On the 16th of September 2016, Christopher Halliwell was given a guilty verdict for the murder of Becky Gooden, which he laughed at. He was handed a whole life tariff and will remain in prison for the rest of his life. Police believe Halliwell may be connected to other murders. Thanks for watching. Until next time.